war is the truest form of divination. It is the testing of one's will and the will of another within that larger will, which, because it binds them, is therefore forced to select. War is the ultimate game, because war is at last a forcing of the unity of existence. War is God.
Thus proclaims Judge Holden the reality of his existence. This video explores how Cormac McCarthy's enigmatic character exists beyond the pages of his masterwork, Blood Meridian. My argument is that Judge Holden is the darkest potential of Faustian man, that he is a Jungian shadow archetype of the same restless spirit which has driven Europeans to elevate Western civilization to its heights. As its shadow, he possesses intellect without restraint. He wields its will to power without higher aim, and lives for conquest without meaning. Judge Holden is the antagonist of Blood Meridian, a historical Western novel set in the last vestige of the American frontier. The story follows the kid, an illiterate runaway teenager with a taste for mindless violence. Despite this, he retains a rudimentary sense of morality. Throughout the course of the story, he joins in with a gang of scalp hunters, and within this gang, we meet Judge Holden. Holden is otherworldly, which is a deliberate choice by Cormac McCarthy. His abilities are plausible in isolation, but supernatural in their totality. Physically, he is albino, completely hairless, stands around 7 feet tall. He is ambidexter, and he is strong enough to crush a man's head with his bare hands. But he is no brute. Intellectually, he is both polyglot and polymath. One of his most impressive feats is when he is able to manufacture gunpowder from natural resources out in the desert while on the run. And besides these feats, he is shrouded in mystery, such as when he appears seemingly out of nowhere. Another hint by McCarthy is the inscription on Holden's rifle that reads, "Et in Arcadia ego." I too was in Arcadia. Arcadia being a harmonious and utopic region of Greek myth. And by this, Holden asserts that he, either literally or symbolically, is omnipresent. His villainy is the most despicable, and the closest he shows to having a motive is to dominate others, and especially to violate the innocent, whether that's invalids, animals, or children. Even some of the low-life scalp hunters are repulsed by him, and to a modern person, Judge Holden will be the ultimate evil. While this is how he is perceived, dismissing him as evil is to refuse to understand man, and Cormac McCarthy's conception of morality was far more nuanced than so. All of this together gives weight to the brutal philosophy Judge Holden preaches. Words are only as strong as the speaker. A Raskolnikov can talk about grand ideas to deaf ears, whereas Holden commands attention when he says, "War is God." To understand what it means for the judge to be a shadow of Faustian man, we must first understand who Faustian man is and how he operates. The Faustian spirit is a term that German historian Oswald Spengler describes the animating force he believed awakened in European man around the early Renaissance. It is characterized by a restless pursuit to explore and conquer the frontiers of nature, from the planetary to the atomic. Without any practical object, merely for the symbol's own sake, to reach North Pole and South Pole. It disregards costs, consequences, or limits in its quest for extension and infinity. Another characteristic of the spirit is that it's inherently individualistic. It creates a morality around the personal will and achievement over harmony or stasis. Spengler also tells us that it was alive earlier and more intensely in the Nordic peoples, pointing to the Viking voyages to Vinland and Serkland. We also see its morality in the Norse text, where it is written that deeds make immortality. I know only one thing that never dies, the reputation of the one who's died. The Faustian spirit, or Germanic ethos, has also been suggested to reshape European Christianity, which would be the most evident by the Crusades. In his later work, Man and Technics, Spengler writes that the dream of the Faustian inventor is to build a world oneself, to be oneself God. This is very close to something that Holden would preach. We can imagine the contrast, where Amazonian tribesmen watching footage of the moon landing.
Vous aviez déjà vu ces images?
Non, jamais.
Est-ce que vous saviez que l'homme blanc était allé sur la Lune?
Oui, on en a entendu parler. Mais pourquoi vous êtes allé là-bas? Qu'est-ce que vous êtes allé chercher là-bas? Quel intérêt pour les humains d'aller là-bas?
The first thing they instinctively ask is not how, but why. Why, you ask? Because the Faustian spirit demanded it. Spengler names Goethe's depiction of Faust as the literary embodiment of this tribe. A longing pure and not to be described drove me to wander over woods and fields, and in a mist of hot abundant tears I felt the world arise and live for me. Faust spends his life mastering conventional knowledge. Still unfulfilled, he turns to magic and enlists Mephistopheles, not to sell his soul, but on a wager. Only if he should experience a moment so fulfilling that he wishes it to last forever will he forfeit himself. Faust agrees to this because he does not believe that he can be fulfilled by something of this world. In Faust there is no desire for pleasure, only the experience that will complete him. The core of Goethe's point is that spiritual questions are not fulfilled with material answers. And for Faust, he only finds fulfillment and dies after working towards something greater than himself. The truth he finds is something transcendent. Another Faustian archetype is that of Herman Melville's Captain Ahab. This entire video is inspired by one where Morgoth's Review analyzed Ahab as a Faustian archetype. In the story, when we meet Ahab, he has previously lost his leg to the white whale Moby Dick, and he now walks around with a peg leg out of one of the whale's teeth. Ahab is consumed with a legendary obsession to pursue the beast to the end of the world in search for revenge. Where Moby Dick represents the unconquered, mythic part of nature, Ahab possesses the relentless Faustian will to overcome it at all cost. The hunt for the whale soon transcends ordinary whaling, because for Ahab this is metaphysical war.
Towards thee I roll, thou all-destroying but unconquering whale. To the last I grapple with thee. From hell's heart I stab at thee. For hate's sake I spit my last breath at thee. Sink all coffins and all hearses to one common pool. And since neither can be mine, let me then tow to pieces while still chasing thee, though tied to thee, thou damned whale. Thus I give up the spear.
Where Faust wants to master knowledge and experience, Ahab wants to conquer nature through feats of will. It's also worth noting that McCarthy was deeply influenced by Melville's work, and Holden has been compared to both Ahab and to the white whale. To Nietzsche, the will to power is the fundamental driving force of life. He describes it as a power to overcome and transform the present self and to create new values. The exact definition is left vague. What Nietzsche does write is that the will, along with the mind and the I, are not causes of experience, rather projections of the self. Thus, the will is individuating, and its nature will be shaped by the wielder. Nietzsche also distinguishes master from slave morality. Master morality is the morality of strength, of will, vitality, nobility, and self-affirmation. Slave morality arose with the early Christians in response to Roman dominance. Lacking power in this world, they reinterpreted weakness as virtue and strength as sin. The psychology of slave morality is an inferiority complex. It requires a subject to pull down to its level. A true master, by contrast, is secure in his own strength without needing to impose his morality on others. Übermensch, the Superman, is an ideal that Nietzsche posits for man. The man one moved towards through an eternal self-overcoming, the will to power wielded responsibly. Spengler's critique was that Nietzsche's philosophy is aimless. The Übermensch is impossible to attain by its very conception, nor is it actionable. One of the closest guides Nietzsche provides is the thought experiment of the eternal return. Imagine that your life, every moment, every joy and suffering, will repeat itself infinitely, exactly as it was. Can you live in such a way that you would will this repetition with joy rather than despair? The affirmation, now truly unconditional, of all that is and of all that one is, of one's own nature and of one's situation. The eternal return can be understood as the mind state that will guide man towards the Übermensch, by willing one's life so completely that it is affirmed through endless repetition. Spengler's final remark on Nietzsche is worth noting. The master morality is nothing other than the Faustian morality that had existed in the West for centuries. Nietzsche didn't create something new, he expressed the existing spirit of the age.
You can find meanness in the least of creatures. But when God made man, the devil was at his elbow. A creature that can do anything.
Now that we have established a background on the Faustian spirit and familiarized ourselves with the Nietzschean terms, we shall see how they fit neatly with Cormac McCarthy's broader philosophy. The human capacity for cruelty is unique because of her intelligence. The beast can break, but man knows how to deliver the most pain. McCarthy agreed with Hobbes that civilization is an attempt to suppress the violent reality of man. Attempt is the key word, for McCarthy didn't believe that modernity's shackles could hold the Hobbesian state of man. In No Country for Old Men, an old sheriff narrates how the world isn't what it used to be. His false reality is shattered as the violent dance chaotically emerges. The descent comes into full force in The Road, where total anarchy and cannibalism erupts in the apocalypse. And in Blood Meridian, we see it on the opposite end, where civilization grows and the frontiers shrink. Holden sees this approaching, but is calm in the knowledge that war endures, as it is the default state, existing before man.
As war becomes dishonored and its nobility called into question, those honorable men who recognize the sanctity of blood will become excluded from the dance, which is the warrior's right. And thereby will the dance become a false dance, and the dancers false dancers. And yet there will be one there always who is a true dancer. And can you guess who that might be? Only that man who has offered himself entire to the blood of war, who has been to the floor of the pit and seen horror in the round, and learned at last that it speaks to his inmost heart. Only that man can dance.
War here refers to a battle of wills, metaphysical and physical. A dancer is one who engages in such war, and a true dancer is someone who embraces the Hobbesian state of man whilst doing so. And the dance? The dance is life as it can be lived. When Holden says that the dance will be false, it is when it is stripped of its transformative nature through the blood of war. The modern world has no place for warriors. Holden himself symbolizes the dance, hence the mythos of him being eternal. He also believes that the kid is capable of being a dancer, but the kid ultimately triumphs by rejecting the dance and thereby Holden's broader teachings. And the price for resisting the corruption is one that the kid pays with his life. In No Country for Old Men, we can observe the hierarchy of dancers. The protagonist, Llewellyn Moss, is a Vietnam War veteran who falls into a thrilling adventure when he seizes a briefcase full of money from the remains of a Mexican drug deal gone wrong. As he eventually becomes pursued, he rediscovers a sense of animating thrill, for he is very competent and cunning. We can say that he is a dancer, and he expresses his dormant Faustian urge. But there is always a bigger fish, and in No Country for Old Men, this is Anton Chigurh, who functions like Judge Holden, but stripped of the supernatural myth. Llewellyn is capable enough to take on a true dancer like Anton, but he eventually recognizes that he is in over his head, and that his steps have become irreversible. Like the kid, he succumbs to the brutal nature of the dance. To Cormac McCarthy, destiny was very fatalistic, but to an extent determined by will. All possibility exists within one's destiny, Will gives the potential in which man can operate to dictate outcome.
The arc of circling bodies is determined by the length of their tether.
The metaphor is that the length represents the potential of one's will, extending from the center, which is one's place in space and time. Destiny is the position of the circling body at any given moment of time. Holden tells it more clearly in another passage.
Any man who could discover his own fate and elect, therefore, some opposite course could only come at last to that selfsame reckoning at the same appointed time. For each man's destiny is as large as the world he inhabits.
We hear Anton echo the same words.
If the rule you followed led you to this, of what use was the rule? Every moment in your life is a turning and everyone a choosing. Somewhere you made a choice, all followed to this. You can say that things could have turned out differently, that they could have been some other way, but what does that mean? They are not some other way, they are this way.
While you may only do one thing in every instance, the illusory possibility that you could act some other way creates from the present a divergence that you and others will and must consider. Yet all is contained within destiny. Holden and Anton know this and operate according to their own rules, which they reckon to reflect their nature. Louvain comes to understand that this is true for him, but since his true nature differs, he has less will within which to affirm his destiny. His words show uncertainty.
It's not about knowing where you are. It's about thinking you got there without taking anything with you. Your notions about starting over, or anybody's. You don't start over. That's what it's about. Every step you take is forever. You can't make it go away. None of it. You think when you wake up in the morning, yesterday don't count. But yesterday is all that does count. What else is there? Your life is made out of the days it's made out of. Nothing else. You might think you could run away and change your name and I don't know what all, start over. And then one morning you wake up and look at the ceiling, and guess who's laying there?
Now that the will's power to define destiny is clear, we can understand why Holden views war as God. When the Christian god of morality was slain, and the will to power became unrestricted, said will could be used to elevate one's own law as a truth for all. Holden refers to an ex-priest in the Scalp Hunter gang as someone who would not be a god-server, but a god himself, and this is inherently Faustian. Instinct to hate, to attack, to annihilate. The frontier, of whatever kind it may be, even the intellectual frontier, is the mortal foe of the will to power. War is a metaphor for the conflict between wills, of each and all, among creatures and nature broadly. Conflict is the struggle that asserts hierarchy, and hierarchy is the truth of nature. It is eternal, metaphysical. Thus, a person's will is only validated by its dominance over other wills. Another metaphor that Holden uses is that of the game. What a game is to him is the act of testing the will against the outcome, destiny. Game's worth are proportional to what is put at stake. War is the ultimate game because it puts the life at stake. And since will shapes destiny to Holden, this is the ultimate mode of being. This is truth, this is divinity, war is God. Holden doesn't outright claim that might makes right, for he doesn't believe in value systems altogether. He is concerned with truth, and believes that will to power shapes outcome. This is one and the same with Anton's case, that what could have been is rendered irrelevant before what is. When Anton feels uncontested, he offers his victims a coin toss, with their life on the line. The same game with ultimate stake. But since Anton dominates the situation, it is not a battle of wills, only him judging the destiny of his victim. For this reason, those who forfeit willpower are pathetic in his and Holden's eyes. Action, not abstract law, determines what will be. Morality and civilizational law has a place here, as immoral acts tend to be perceived as injustices, which elicit retaliatory actions from society. But this only proves McCarthy's broader point. He believed that there exists both a deeper intrinsic sense of morality, as well as the individual authority that actualizes it, similar to the reality in which the Übermensch operates. From the Hobbesian view of man, McCarthy saw morality as an attempt to hold the brutal nature at bay, and has Holden explicitly point out the foundations of slave morality.
Moral law is an invention of mankind for the disenfranchisement of the powerful in favor of the weak.
This doesn't mean that everyone will embrace the dance, the violent reality. The kid has potential for it, but wills his own law. For example, when he tries to help the wounded members of the gang, and he is not impressed by the judge whatsoever. We see something similar in The Road, where the father and son describe themselves as the good guys that are carrying the fire. The son makes his survival-focused father reluctantly offer food to a blind old man, and spares the life of a robber who stole all of their possessions. One could argue that moral law expresses a higher truth. Yet since it is channeled through individuals, their actions and power ultimately determine how moral truths manifest in the world. Whether Holden is supernatural or not is secondary for what I will consider. Even if he exceeds human normality, I will refer to him like a person for the sake of comparison. He is not reducible to psychology. Instead, he operates as an archetypal force that can manifest psychologically. If he was ever human, then he has already overcome man to achieve its mastery. If he is not, then he is the demonic principle embodied. As an archetype, he is symbolic of the dark potential of Faustian man, similar to what Jung would call the shadow self. The Jungian shadow is the idea that the subconscious houses a portion of one's nature that the conscious ego is unaware of, represses, or denies. The shadow is a psychological character with a drive that we deem as incompatible with our self-image. What emerges from Spengler, Goethe, Melville, and Nietzsche is not a moral doctrine, but a structure of drive. The Faustian spirit is characterized by the restless will of the individual to expand, master, and conquer, and to refuse boundaries, whether physical or metaphysical. In Faust, the drive seeks fulfillment and ultimately finds transcendence. In Ahab, it streams into obsession and ends in destruction. In Nietzschean man, it becomes a project of self-overcoming and creation of new values. Holden fits this archetype completely in terms of capacity. In terms of general and specialized skill, he knows no equal. Total knowledge and mastery for the sake of dominion in all domains is Faustian. True dancers like Holden and Anton cannot accept external laws, following the Übermensch ideal. Where they would have fit society perfectly as war chiefs or assassins 1,000 years ago, they are now outcasts. In a world of peace and slave morality, their immense capacity for violence makes them uncontrollable and uncontested. Their aimless leisure becomes domination. Holden does this intellectually, physically, and spiritually, whereas Anton plays and toys with modernity. What happens when this Faustian force is stripped of direction, longing, and dissatisfaction? What happens when the will to power turns downward and inward, against nature, against man, against God, becoming an end in itself? Even for one who strives beyond good and evil, Holden stands out as a devil in disguise, the demonic in nature and the demonic in our nature. When Holden studies an archaeological find, he makes a sketch of the item, then burns the actual object. When he botanizes leaves, it is to bind and erase their memory. In a phenomenological sense, as the particulars disappear, so too does the possibility of knowing about the ideas. This suppressing direction is a clear example of where he resembles an archon or the demiurge. Knowledge as domination. Yet in the same passage, we find the clearest Faustian essence of what Holden preaches.
Only nature can enslave man, and only when the existence of each last entity is routed out and made to stand naked before him will he be properly suzerain of the earth. The man who believes that the secrets of the world are forever hidden lives in mystery and fear. Superstition will drag him down. The rain will erode the deeds of his life. But that man who sets himself the task of singling out the thread of order from the tapestry will, by the decision alone, have taken charge of the world. And it is only by such taking charge that he will effect a way to dictate the terms of his own fate. The freedom of birds is an insult to me. I'd have them all in zoos.
This is the implicit Faustian nature of modern science. French metaphysician René Guénon considered this to be the fatal error of science, inverting the hierarchy of truth. Modern man, instead of seeking to raise himself to truth, seeks to drag truth down to his own level. Even if this is the impulse of Faustian man, he does this not to subvert the truth because he hates it. Instead, it occurs when the truth is secondary to the object of his quest. Instead of using his drive to ascend to the truth, he uses it to actualize and elevate his own truth. As he does, the drive becomes pointed downward and inward, and meaning is destroyed. To paraphrase Julius Evola, the impulse to know is transformed into an impulse to dominate. Science morphs from being a means to know the world into a means to change the world. The will to power turned on nature. What truly makes Holden the shadow is the orientation of the will. The kid resists the judge and the dark Faustian impulse, but does not integrate it, and he is destroyed as a result. Holden shows what the will to overcome becomes when it's untethered from transcendental and transformative direction. Even the Nietzscheans and nihilists who find truth in his observation recognize within themselves that this mode of being is improper. Holden stirs in the unknown regions of the mind, but he is not inevitable. Holden demonstrates the extreme, corrupt endpoint of the Faustian drive, untethered from ethics or higher purpose. Inherent in the nature of the Faustian spirit is going beyond bonds, be that moral law or judicial law. Like the Übermensch, wielding will to power, both Holden and Anton have surmounted these with their own laws and rules. Where they become detestable is in their orientation. A man like Ahab would never be content as a suzerain. He lives for the drive. The closest we get to a mission in Holden is his corruption. He preaches it, and he prays to enact it. But there is no glory in this Archon-like orientation to subdue, and anyone can recognize this. Yet, from the heights of his power, Holden may judge any and all. For as the truest of dancers, he is uncontested. That is why he is the judge. How this shadow is faced depends on one's spiritual inheritance. Some are called toward Apollonian stillness and harmony. Others are born into a Faustian striving and must accept its restlessness. But striving becomes corruption when it feeds on others rather than overcoming the self. One cannot refuse the dance, for that ensures destruction at the hands of other dancers. Rejecting Holden entirely is naive. Embracing him is damnation. But he dances in both light and in shadow, and likewise can the will be directed both up toward the truth and down against nature. Integrating the force of the shadow within lies on the path to transcendence. In contrast, ignoring the shadow will cause it to grow in strength and danger. Dr. Faust found transcendence by creating something greater than himself. Captain Ahab accepted that his path would lead to destruction. Nietzschean man still bravely walks his tightrope into uncertainty, and Judge Holden is dancing, and he says that he will never die.